When HR said that an MBA was more important than experience, she just left. No shouting, no drama. The story isn't for views. My mother works in an office and I know how it is. It's about real choices, about the silence that speaks of self-respect. All names, companies and addresses are fictitious. But the emotions are real. Listen carefully.
Take the package or walk. That's what she said. Eyes empty, like it was a script she'd read 100 times but never felt once. I looked past her, through the glass wall, to where he stood, arms folded, grinning like a kid who just got the last donut. The Wharton kid, the consultant, barely 3 weeks in, and already they were adjusting the compensation tiers around his coffee orders. Meanwhile, I'd been here 9 years, built the vendor backbone, coded half their automation layers, trained 3 heads of ops. My reward? A 39% haircut and a polite shove out the door. I didn't flinch. Not in front of her, not in front of him. I reached into my tote, placed my badge on the table like I was dropping a poker chip. Then the laptop, then the project binder. Click, click, click. Each sound sharper than the last. I buttoned my blazer, same one I wore when I closed our biggest logistics overhaul, and said, effective 2:15 p.m. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I'd already set the cascade in motion. By the time the elevator reached the ground floor, one of our live procurement builds was already hanging, waiting for a credential it would never get. By the way, if you're listening and haven't subscribed yet, please do. Over 97% of our listeners forget to subscribe or like the video, and it's a huge help to our team. We work hard to bring these stories to life. Thank you. The thing is, they didn't even ask why I left the binder behind, didn't flip through it, didn't scan the QR tag tucked in the back sleeve. If they had, they'd have found no strategy notes, no rollout plan. Just 6 silent triggers, each one tied to compliance protocols I'd authored years ago, each one dependent on a credential string they no longer had access to. Not sabotage. I'm not petty. It was insurance. The only kind a woman can rely on in a room full of blazers that still think pedigree beats proof. He probably thought he'd won. Thought I left in shame or defeat. He doesn't know what shame looks like. Real shame is being told your value's conditional on where you got your MBA when you were the one who trained the guy whose mistake cost us $2.7 last year. Real shame is eating it quietly because now's not the time to rock the boat. No, I didn't leave in shame. I left because they mistook silence for weakness, and because I was tired of explaining my worth to people who measure competence by LinkedIn endorsements. In the car, I watched the building shrink behind me, floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting clouds and bad decisions. My phone buzzed once. Just once. Internal systems trying to verify access. It couldn't. Of course, it couldn't. My credentials were null at 2:15 p.m. sharp. Their fallback sequence had 3 hours. And the binder? The binder was patient, just like me. He'd walk into meetings like he was prepping for a TED Talk, throwing jargon like candy at a parade. Vertical integration. Omnichannel throughput. Disruptive parity. I counted 17 buzzwords in one pitch and not a single line of actionable logic. That might impress a boardroom, but it doesn't stabilize vendor chains at 3 a.m. when a customs form misfires and 5 shipping containers go dark on the Gulf. He didn't know how to open the routing dashboard, let alone track where the flags came from. Still, he had a Wharton MBA and a trust fund tan, so they gave him the keys. He renamed files, just randomly. Removed versioning tags because the titles looked messy. Deleted 3 macros I wrote for threshold-based failover because they weren't in the documentation. Of course they weren't. I built them in a crisis during a month when we were onboarding 2 new offshore vendors and running with 1 compliance manager on medical leave. I didn't write documentation. I wrote uptime. So I stopped arguing, stopped coaching him. They didn't want a builder anymore. They wanted a showman. That's fine. Let them watch the show. Meanwhile, I went clinical. I opened my private repo, the one they never asked about because they assumed I was just another process lead, and started logging every live dependency, every vendor route, soft lock, compliance tag, and API heartbeat. If it moved, I logged it. If it didn't, I flagged it. Then I compiled everything into a single master file, gave it a boring name, Continuity Bridge V3.9. It sat quietly on a private backup server, escrowed, time-stamped, redundant in 3 locations, one of which wasn't even in the country. People think revenge is loud. It isn't. It's meticulous. Revenge doesn't scream. It waits in a folder you don't know to look for. The first time I noticed something missing was 3 days before I resigned. One of my backup alerts pinged for a deleted folder. Not a big one, just a few logs tied to risk-based routing, but I knew that folder. I'd tagged it for auto-replication when he started messing around with streamlining. He deleted it without knowing it was still alive. Reborn quietly on my personal dev key, backed up under audit controls he didn't have the clearance to see. It was like watching a toddler play with a loaded gun. But this toddler had a corner office and a performance bonus tied to quarterly projections he didn't understand. So I let him keep breaking things, because now I had every reason to protect myself, not them. They valued the show. I built the system. And systems don't clap. Systems crash. He smirked when I handed over the binder. Like I was finally surrendering to the natural order of things, men with MBAs on top, women who keep the trains running, quietly phased out. He had no idea what I actually did. Not really. He thought I managed budgets and signed off on vendor invoices. Thought I was the lady who made spreadsheets look nice. I let him believe that. I even let HR believe it. Why correct someone when their arrogance builds you cover? In reality, 60% of live operations depended on compliance check scripts I had written, nested, and optimized over 9 years. And every one of those scripts was tied to my unique credential set. Not shared, not documented, not accessible through any third-party dashboard or clumsy consultant override. My badge didn't just open doors. It was the system heartbeat. At 2:14 p.m., I stepped into the mainframe interface one last time, entered my credentials, bypassed the visual shell, dropped into the root node and typed lock node user.inactive window. 180 meters, no flags, no pings, just one soft green confirmation, node condition accepted, timed validation active. What that means, since no one ever cared to ask, is this. If my credentials aren't revalidated within 180 minutes, system nodes begin suspending in concentric layers. Not all at once, just the essentials. Vendor routing first, then procurement handoffs, then payment reconciliation, like a heartbeat skipping a few pulses before cardiac arrest. You wouldn't even know it's happening until the delay logs start stacking and the fallback queues jam. Not a single alert would fire unless someone tried to override the process manually, which no one would, because they thought I only approved budgets. By 2:15 p.m., I was out the door, calm, polite, unapologetic. I even smiled at the receptionist on the way out. The laptop they collected? Factory wiped. Nothing left but a decoy dashboard and a sticky note in the drive labeled Q4 roll-up draft. My real logs, my architecture, protocols, safeguards were never on that machine. They lived elsewhere, places he didn't know existed. People don't realize how fragile their systems are until the person holding them together stops showing up. There's a false sense of invincibility in enterprise software, but what they forget is it's not the tech that keeps it alive. It's the human fingerprints hidden behind the automation, and I had every fingerprint memorized. By the time the elevator hit ground, I'd already toggled off my access. The system heartbeat was still steady, but I knew the rhythm was timed, and the clock was already ticking. They booked the reintroduction call for 3 p.m., same day I walked. No delay, no debrief. Just a slapdash, strategy alignment session pushed out to half our vendor network and the internal teams I used to manage. Rebranding, procurement vision, future state logistics, all buzzwords. No scaffolding. I didn't watch live. I didn't have to. 3 minutes after it started, someone from my old team texted me a screen grab, him, in front of a deck titled Next Gen Supply Chain Realignment. Subtitle, Efficiency Through Disruption. Jesus. He spoke like he was pitching a wellness app, not a compliance-sensitive global pipeline. Synergy framework. Agile redundancy. I nearly spit out my coffee when someone in the back of the conference room, probably Greg from Vendor Ops, interrupted the monologue with a basic question. Who approved your risk overrides for last mile routing? There was a long pause, then he blinked and said, I think, finance? Wrong answer. See, before I left, I yanked the keys. quietly, not to break anything, just to make sure he couldn't. The clearance system I designed didn't need flashy protections or biometric gates. It just needed silence. If the approval node didn't receive revalidation from someone with the correct role-based access, it didn't run. No override, no failover. Just stalled threads and frozen handoffs, neatly time-stamped and auto-logged. And the system was obedient. At 3:02, right in the middle of his procurement realignment slide, the daily compliance report auto-generated. He probably didn't even know that report existed. It hit 10 inboxes simultaneously. Vendor flag count, 3. Threshold breaches, 2. Missing approvals, all. The funny thing? The subject line wasn't even dramatic. It just read, Live Chain Exception Report, Override Failure, ID Newell. I could picture it. Him squinting at the screen, stalling. Someone whispering, What's ID Newell? And him sweating, scrambling, trying to guess what script just exposed his entire presentation as fiction. Detached doesn't even begin to describe how I felt. I was sitting on my patio with a grapefruit seltzer and a lawn chair angled toward the sun. My phone buzzed 3 times in a row. First from someone in finance, just the word, then one from legal. Did you see this? And finally, from procurement. Please tell me this was planned. Of course it wasn't planned, at least not by them. This was always the gap. They valued performance theater, but systems don't run on theater. They run on fluency. He could wave his arms all he wanted. The handoffs were dead. The trust layer was empty, and now the cracks were on full display for every partner on that call to see. Around 2:45 p.m., just half an hour after I walked, the system began whispering back. Not a siren, not a crash, just soft alerts at first. A payout delay here, a locked audit thread there, then a vendor ping timeout followed by a failed SLA timestamp. They probably thought it was a network hiccup, something to shrug off with a tech's on it. But tech wasn't on it. Tech was gone. And so was every embedded heartbeat I'd ever hardwired into their fragile choreography. One by one, the processes hesitated, then stalled. The finance dashboard tried to reroute through its redundancy hub, but the hub was never designed for this load, at least not without root credential authority. And that went out the door with me. Somewhere in that glass castle, someone clicked override, and the system politely replied, failover locked, originator credentials required. I can almost guarantee what happened next. He walked over to the HR lead, probably doing that half laugh he used when trying to mask panic. Hey, do we have admin access for the procurement triggers? And she, completely unbothered, probably replied, You'll have to check with IT, or was that part of Claire's role? Spoiler, it was. And IT. Let's just say they didn't build the engine. They maintained it. But you don't fix a ship mid-sail when the architect already took the compass and the rudder. By 2:58, the queue logs would have started stacking. Internal pings failing. Vendor platforms bouncing handshake requests. The fallback loop kicking in, but too slowly to matter. Not because the systems were broken, but because they were never meant to run cold. They needed warmth. They needed hands that understood why a threshold trigger had to delay by 2.4 seconds to align with offshore currency syncs. He didn't know that. He just saw lag. And me? I was sitting by a lake. No signal, no Slack, no badge, just a folding chair, a lukewarm thermos, and a paperback I'd been trying to finish for months. When my phone buzzed once, a low emergency ping from a system I forgot was even connected. I let it slide into voicemail. I wasn't curious. I already knew. That whole company was built like a Jenga tower, balanced, delicate, quietly dependent on pressure points no one ever noticed. I didn't pull the block. I just stopped holding it in place. And at 3 RPM sharp, the tower began to lean. At exactly 3:05, the call lit up my screen. Russell D., CFO. I stared at it for a second. The last time Russell called me directly was 2 years ago, and it was to ask how to explain API load balancing to a potential investor without sounding like a jackass. Now his name was flashing like a fire alarm. I let it ring twice. Not to be dramatic, just to remind him that access wasn't instant anymore. When I picked up, his voice hit like static wrapped in panic. Claire, we're seeing system-wide holds, vendor flags. The finance dashboard's in fallback. What the hell is happening? I didn't even shift in my seat. The breeze off the lake made tiny ripples across the water, and a couple ducks were waddling up the shore like they had front row seats. I sipped from my thermos, tucked my book into the bag beside me, and said, "Has someone revalidated the lock node protocol?" Silence. A long inhale, then Jesus. And then softer, like he was trying not to sound desperate. "Look, can you come in?" I smiled, not that he could see it. "Where are you calling from?" More silence. His next words gave him away. "I'm already in the car." That told me everything. He wasn't just trying to get me on the phone, he was halfway to my building before he even hit call. That meant legal had already flagged the continuity bridge file. That meant whatever backup plan the Wharton darling pitched in his synergy decks had already folded like a wet paper napkin. And it meant Russell finally understood that none of this was theater. They didn't want me back. Not really. They wanted the scaffolding they'd just kicked out from under themselves. "Claire," he said, tone shifting now, less corporate, more human. "We're dead in the water without you. Ops is paralyzed. Vendors are demanding answers. Legal's worried about exposure." I let his words hang in the air like the humidity that always creeps in before a thunderstorm. Then I said, flat and measured, "If you want me back in that building, Russell, you'll need to meet me somewhere neutral, and you'll need to bring paperwork." The silence this time was shorter. "Name it." I already had. I'd written the terms in my head 2 weeks ago, the moment I saw the job posting for a strategic operations consultant with executive-level pedigree. They'd thought I'd stay small, that I'd tolerate being replaced by a slide deck and a smirk. They forgot who built the floor those slides were projected on. We met in a glass-walled conference room at the Hyatt off Route 9, halfway between my place and the office. Neutral ground, neutral carpet, neutral coffee, just enough civility to pretend we weren't having a crisis negotiation over hotel-grade espresso. Russell looked like hell. Jacket wrinkled, tie loosened, a streak of something on his collar that might have been vending machine coffee, or the stress of realizing your entire procurement system was built on one person's spine. He didn't sit right away, just hovered near the table, gripping the chair back like it might save him from drowning. "I know you're angry," he said finally, the words measured like they'd been workshopped by legal. "I'm not," I said, "just methodical." He blinked. That threw him. Anger they were prepared for. Method was worse. I reached into my folder, nothing fancy, just a printout of my original onboarding packet. Third revision, signed by HR and legal, back when I was still young enough to believe dotted lines meant mutual trust. I flipped to page 13 and slid it across the table. He didn't understand at first, just scanned it, then looked up. "What am I looking at?" "Clause 14.7b, read it out loud." He cleared his throat. "Continuity bridges may only be reauthorized by the original author or a quorum-approved override, which requires 3 weeks review and full audit trail." Then he froze. You could watch it hit him, like watching a computer freeze 1 pixel at a time. "You buried this." "No," I said, folding my hands calmly. "I embedded it." It wasn't hidden. It wasn't in 6-point font. It was just nested inside a compliance language rewrite from 3 years ago, approved by legal, reviewed by procurement, and signed by Russell himself. They were so focused on the part about third-party verification thresholds that nobody thought twice about the bridge clause. Why would they? Continuity bridges were just an internal term I coined for interlocked routing frameworks. Sounded harmless, almost pretty, but that clause meant they couldn't reauthorize the system without me, or spend 3 weeks explaining to the board why key routing tools were offline during quarterly close. "Jesus," he whispered. I shrugged. "Shouldn't be a surprise. It's the same paperwork you all pushed for during vendor consolidation. I just made sure the people writing it knew how the system actually worked." He lowered himself slowly into the chair like the weight of it all was finally registering. "What do you want, Claire? Just tell me what it takes to fix this." I didn't answer right away. Let the silence stretch until it felt like a decision. Then I leaned forward. "I'll write the fix," I said, "but not for free, not for ego, and not for your new golden boy to botch again in 6 weeks. He nodded, defeated. "Name it." I already had, months ago. While they were off rebranding loyalty as overhead, I was preparing the one thing they forgot to control, the person who knew how it all fit together. I walked back in like I'd never left. Same hallway, same elevator chime, same front desk staff who wouldn't make eye contact, like they'd all gotten the same quiet email. She's back. Don't ask. There was no welcome committee, no HR, no awkward banner, just Russell waiting by the glass doors to the operations wing with a folder in hand and Sweat just barely holding the line at his collar. We didn't shake hands. We didn't exchange pleasantries. That wasn't the deal. I took the folder, flipped it open, and scanned the top sheet. It was exactly what I'd dictated. Nothing more, nothing less. Full reinstatement, no probation, no 6-month evaluation period, no corporate nonsense about rebuilding trust. I didn't lose trust. They lost comprehension. Second, complete access autonomy, my credentials, my sandbox. No shared logins, no consultant keys on mirrored shells. I wasn't rebuilding a system just so some intern with a dashboard template could optimize it into a liability again. Third, the consultant, Mr. Synergy himself, was limited to presentations only. No live systems, no database triggers, no approval workflows. His role was now strictly performance art, slides and handshakes. That's it. Fourth, all audit and approval logs reverted to my last validated version, not the Frankenstein mess they tried to fake after I left. My signature had a timestamp. That timestamp was now the official reset point. And finally, I would report directly to the CFO. No dotted lines, no matrixed accountability, no collaborative oversight from HR or strategy. Just me, a hardline to Russell, and a locked chain of command. He stood there while I read it, trying not to fidget. When I got to the end, I looked up. This the final draft? He hesitated, maybe half a breath, then nodded. Yes. I handed him my signed copy. No ceremony, no eye roll, no satisfaction, just execution. I wasn't here to feel good about it. I was here to make sure the system didn't drown the people still stuck inside it. When I logged in again, the system purred like it had been waiting. My dashboard snapped to life. 5 warnings, 12 rollback options, 17 logs of failed override attempts, all tied to Newell. He was still in the building. They'd kept him on, of course. They always do. But the damage was done. And now, finally, they brought him into the loop. They scheduled a session. Knowledge transfer. The irony nearly made me laugh. But I showed up. Not for him. For the system. And for every woman watching, silently from her own corner of an open office plan, waiting for someone to prove we don't vanish, we just reload. He was already seated when I walked into the team room, tapping nervously at a stylus like it might save him from what was about to happen. The same man who'd once brushed off my role as compliance adjacent now looked like a high school student waiting for the final he didn't study for. A few others were there too, vendor ops, one guy from systems, one from finance. Nobody said much, nobody needed to. I placed a printed document in front of him. Real paper, no screens, no tabs, just black ink on white pages weighted with silence. Technical architecture overview, I said. I wrote this before you arrived. Read page 3 out loud. He blinked. Tried to smile, tried to soften the moment with charm, but his throat betrayed him. He cleared it, adjusted his posture, and began. He didn't get far. The first sentence tripped him up. By the second, he was mumbling acronyms he didn't recognize, skipping over dependencies like they were foreign names in a novel he never planned to finish. Syntax eluded him. Logic broke down. The people in the room shifted in their chairs. I didn't embarrass him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I stepped past him, typed a 16-character string into the root access shell, and hit return. The system hesitated, just long enough to feel intentional, then lit up. One by one, dashboards unlocked. Backlogs cleared. Delayed approvals flowed like water breaking through a dam. On the main monitor, the validation stamp blinked to green. In the lower right corner, a footer quietly appeared. Reauthorized by originator. That was it. No applause, no speeches. Just breath returning to the lungs of a company that had forgotten who kept it alive. I gathered my things, walked to the door. Before leaving, I turned to him. Not unkindly, not cruelly, just finally. I didn't walk out because I was afraid, I said. I walked because you needed to feel this. He didn't answer. He stays, of course, with a title, with a corner office, but everyone knows now. He's the face, not the force. And me, I don't need recognition. I have access and a system that answers only to me.
하진이님이 머리.
심각한데? 그게 고장났으면 심각한 건데? 어?